Welcome to our webinar, Into the Unknown, Higher Education in 2020. This is part of the Dare to Care webinar series by New City Press and Living City Magazine of the Focolare movement. We're also co-sponsored today by the Fordham University Institute on Religion, Law, and Lawyers' Work, and the Boston College Institute for Administrators in Catholic Higher Education. My name is Michael James. I will moderate this evening's conversation. I'm a professor in the graduate program of higher education at the Boston College Lentz School of Education and Human Development, and I'm the director of the Boston College Institute for Administrators in Catholic Higher Education. Let me again welcome you, and at any time during our conversation, if you as participants, audience participants, have a question that you'd like us to consider, possibly this evening or at following up from the webinar, you may use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Let me introduce our panelists, our collaborators, and our conversation partners. First, it's a pleasure to welcome Hosman Ospino, who is Associate Professor of Theology and Religious Education at the Boston College School of Theology and Ministry, where he serves as Department Chair and Director of Graduate Programs in Hispanic Ministry. Dr. Ospino is the Principal Investigator for several national and critically important studies on Hispanic Catholics. Currently, he is advancing a national study on Latino Catholic vocations. Welcome, Hosman. I'd like to introduce Professor JEANINE NTIHIRAGEZA, who is a professor and program coordinator at Northeastern Illinois University. She's the founding director of the Multilingual Learning Center and founding chair of the Initiative on Genocide and Human Rights Research in African and the Diaspora. Welcome, Professor NTIHIRAGEZA. I also welcome and delighted to have with us Professor Gregory Lewis, who is an assistant professor of law at the City University of New York, specializing in the business law topics of contracts and business associations. Prior to Professor Lewis's teaching career, he co-founded and served as the initial general counsel of Communities Resist, a civil legal service organization serving low-income households and community-based organizations in the New York areas of Brooklyn and Queens. Welcome, Professor Lewis. And it's a real pleasure to welcome Christopher Piazza, who is a fourth-year literary journalism major at the University of California, Irvine. He's currently the co-editor of the sports section, the official campus newspaper, New University. He also co-hosts the To Get There podcast, which features stories of people that inspire others to make our world more peaceful, sustainable, and united. And I'm going to begin with Chris. Chris, would you like to quickly introduce a piece that you're going to play for us as at the top of our webinar that I believe in a very visceral way will provide us with some content and thematic ideas about our topic from the voices of students from across the country. Chris, do you want to just say a quick word about what we're going to see in a few seconds?
Hello, everybody. My name's Chris. Thank you, Michael, for introducing me, and I'm happy to be here with all the panelists here today. So over the past few weeks, I've been conducting some interviews with my fellow students, asking them kind of what their feeling is about entering, going back to school after what we've been through with coronavirus and are continuing to go through the coronavirus and also with the protests for racial justice. So I took a lot of insight, a lot of time to just kind of really get as many perspectives as I can. No, this isn't every perspective, because if I would have had everybody say something, it would have been like a 24-hour video, and I needed to make this into like a less than 10-minute video. So Yeah, so there's going to be featuring student voices from around the country and one from Canada, just about what we feel and what we would ask our professors and also our administration at our schools to also take note of. And also it's kind of a call to action for our fellow students to continue on as we enter this new school year. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. Thank you.
Having more perspectives in the classroom, more inclusive environments, a safe space will be very important as we move forward in these times.
As the end of summer comes closer, higher education institutions across the country are navigating a complicated process of starting and anticipating what the new academic year will bring in this moment of an unyielding global pandemic and the persistent systemic racism. A fundamental concern among the myriad of challenges to consider includes the health, economic, and social well-being of our college campus communities. As a fourth-year journalism student myself, I wanted to understand what are some of these concerns from the perspectives of my fellow students. So for the past few days, I sat down virtually with 8 US students and 1 Canadian student to get their insight on what they've been feeling and what they will think will happen in the fall. So why don't you just start out, give me your name.
Okay. Hi, I'm Frankie.
My name is Miguel Carrion.
Crystal Diaz.
I'm Stephon Curtis Jones.
Miriam.
Ryan Paglinawan.
Mary.
Leonardo Matane.
I'm Danya Pena, and I am a first year in college.
This isn't the first time we've had to deal with online distance education. Since the outbreak of COVID-19 in North America this past spring, schools had to shut their doors and send their students home to finish the rest of the academic year.
It's definitely an interesting turn of events because I was expecting spring quarter to be in the dorm still.
And of course, it was a work in progress as students had to face financial and housing insecurities. And at the end of May and beginning of June, students began experiencing and participating in the global outcry for racial justice. As some have taken their passion and peacefully protested on the streets, others use social media to raise awareness and demand action from each other and the government.
So being able to document the George Floyd protests, right? See what was going on and see the people's reaction and how angry and passionate they were about rocking the whole system that perpetuates violence against, Black communities, brown communities, and other people of color. It was really a sight to see.
On top of the ongoing fight for racial justice, North America is facing the consequences of the mishandling of the coronavirus pandemic, which saw states close again after premature openings because cases began to rise before they even began to fall. And this has led many institutions to delay or walk back to decisions on whether to incorporate distance learning, in-person classes with the proper health protocols, or hybrid courses. And with that, students haven't been able to get out of leases for their apartments,
Because I couldn't get out of my lease.
We kept calling around June and they said that no lease cancellations were allowed, which was disappointing.
and understand how to balance college life and facilitating organizations like sororities.
So balancing studies, job, and family is kind of a little difficult.
And it's really tough because you don't get that in-person connection and you can't see the interaction between other girls in the house. We had to really strategize on how to convey our sisterhood and why people even want to be in it.
And for the students that are studying courses that need lab or studio work, they have been left with either having to somehow replicate that online or step back into the physical classroom.
But yeah, just in terms of those like in-person hands-on labs that's really hard to do. Because even if they make like a virtual setup and they're like, I don't know how they're going to do that. Some virtual software where you can move parts as if you're doing it in person. It's not the same.
I chose to go in person. Those classes were really, really small. They have 4 or 5 people, or 5 students in each class. So I was like, okay, it's probably safe if I can go in person and social distance in the classrooms and like still wear a mask.
As the students are either adapting to another learning experience or trying to find money to cover a lease, or they're still struggling to find secure internet connection or space to study, there's some things that us students want our professors to remember and to understand.
Leniency, there needs to be really more of that.
Flexibility in instruction and also in learning, so both sides, with the professors offering certain way of teaching and then also the students get to explore new ways of learning and having their education online.
That's about all they can do, and make sure that they're always available.
It is one thing to talk about it, but we students and also our professors must do and act upon this during the upcoming school year, which requires a lot of empathy, communication, and creativity. And for Stephon Curtis Jones, he feels that if the professors know who their students are and how they are doing, then the learning environment will be more cohesive and more positive, even if it's online.
I'm pretty sure I'm the only Black person in that class, but I really forget about that, of the whole demographic divide, because I feel very comfortable and happy in that class. Like, both my professors do a great job of engaging with us and making sure we're having a good morning. Just being able to have that regular everyday conversation goes a long way.
After we go about these suggestions and cultivate the relationships with our peers and most importantly our professors, we could also build a connection to the administration, which deals with the decisions of an institution. Whether it regards financial or health issues, having the support and collaboration with professors could help us bridge that connection.
And I think a big thing that we've learned this past summer, especially with the Black Lives Matter movement, is that like young people, our voices, they can be heard and we can make big changes. So that just goes to show that like there is possibility to make change in your university.
And when we add everything together, the impact inside the classroom is just as great outside of the classroom, because it's what we learn on the inside will greatly affect what we do on the outside. And to do that in these times, we can still foster the sense of a community of a college campus online or in person.
Honestly, that sense of community is something that I feel is just so deeply ingrained with seeing other students face to face that I don't know if there's that much universities can really do aside from what schools like Hunter have done with online events. But I definitely see that sense of community in Hunter and other universities.
Especially in education, where these upcoming students are our future, and it's good to have that broader perspective, that global context, and having more perspectives and a deeper understanding that their education is more than just themselves. There's a greater purpose to it.
These are just some and not all the perspectives of students. We have to remember that some of us are in prime position to succeed, or others are involved in intercollegiate athletics, which in itself is a complicated issue. And others are still working the essential jobs that require them to step away from studying to help others during these times. And we need to remember that professors are in the same boat as us. And in order to find progress and to be productive this year, we need to make sure that we all know in one or more ways we are all going to go through this together in communion and community. With the proper steps in understanding where students and professors are at, we can continue to navigate these times with things being known.
So if I could say anything to professors, I would definitely say good luck and thank you, because all of your efforts, all of their efforts are what are going to help students in need right now the most.
Thank you, Chris. A terrific way for us to set up the conversation. So let's begin right away. From the professor's point of view, Professor Ospino, how would you characterize this new unknown as we prepare for a new academic year?
Thank you very much, Michael and Chris, for that wonderful video. Thank you, everyone, for being part of this conversation, and to those of you who are watching us or listening to this conversation. There is no doubt that our society hurts, and it hurts significantly. We are being affected as a society by this global pandemic. You know, we cannot ignore the fact that almost 1 million people have died worldwide. As of today, more than 170,000 people in the United States have died, you know, parents, grandparents, mothers, brothers, fathers, sisters, cousins, friends, and many others. At the same time, you know, this big pandemic collided with the pandemic of racism and social injustice that is affecting our society. And it really hurts to know that still in the 21st century, in the year 2020, people are losing their lives because of their skin color. People are being discriminated because of their background, social, ethnic, racial background. It is sad to know that many of our sisters and brothers do not feel safe in our own society and in our own neighborhoods, that they feel and they know that their lives actually are threatened just because of who they are. And at the same time, we got another big, you know, in an elections year, we got a country that is highly divided. You know, the major polarization, the political and ideological division that is tearing us apart as a society, as government, is tearing our families apart, is tearing our institutions apart. You know, this crazy divide, you know, liberal, conservative, progressive, traditional, and many other categories that we have invented, created, are destroying the unity and the possibility of society. And in the middle of all of this, our students, our colleagues, and we are inserted in this. We were thrown in the midst of all these dynamics brewing together. And we hurt together, no, whether directly or indirectly. So as we venture into the beginning of a new academic year, we return to our institutions, whether physically or virtually or in a hybrid way, with the understanding that some of us have actually lost someone, whether to one of these pandemics that I just mentioned, or that some of us may not see our families or our friends. Recently, a few weeks ago, I wrote a piece, an article that was published in several papers, in which I actually shared with a conversation with my parents who are elderly. They live in South America. And my parents and I, you know, talked about the fact that I may not see them again, you know, physically. That's the fact. I do not know when I will be able to travel to see them. I do not know whether, you know, this virus may affect them and so on. They cannot travel to the United States. And we keep connected. Yet we know this unknown remains, you know, is upon our shoulders. As students and as faculty, administrators that return into our institutions, we cannot ignore the pain of the people. We cannot ignore the suffering, the sense of loss, sense of confusion, the feelings of anger and distress that many people bring with us, that many of us bring with us returning to the classroom. So this is exactly a point in history in which we as educators in institutions of higher education are called to be human, more human than ever. And we do so by doing three things: being compassionate, being caring, and being companions. By being compassionate, we have to know that this is a time to reclaim the original meaning of this particular word, to feel with. We cannot ignore the pain of the other. We cannot ignore the anxiety of the other. We cannot ignore the concerns of and the pains of our students and our colleagues and our neighbors, their families. This is a time to be caring. We need to create spaces in our institutions for people to share, you know, whether it's the classroom or virtually, during retreats, during conversatories. No, we need to create those spaces. We cannot reduce, you know, higher education or the educational opportunity to just the transmission of contents. Once again, this is a time to care about the human dimension of who we are. Let's start, for instance, our sessions with a simple question for our students or for our colleagues when we begin our meetings. How are you doing? That's the question. That's the most basic question, and perhaps the most meaningful question that our students are going to remember after this particular time. How are you doing? Make some time in our meetings, in our classes, even if that takes a few minutes. We need to find our way to connect our teaching and our research, our mentoring, to some of the issues and questions that are weighing on people during these particular days. And finally, we need to be companions. This is a time to walk together as a community. It is a time to express what it means to live in communion. This is particularly a time to walk with those who are most wounded in this particular moment because of the pandemic or because of racism or because of polarization. This is a time to walk with those who are most vulnerable. Higher education in 2020 needs to be characterized by its human dimension.
Thank you, Professor Ospino. Compassion, care, companionship in the face of horrific suffering and loss. Professor NTIHIRAGEZA, what is your view of this unknown that we are living in and through and will be into the future?
Okay, can you hear me? Okay, all right. Hi, everyone. That's actually a difficult question. I almost feel like saying, I don't know, as the answer to what do we expect? And I realized that as a question that comes to everyone, because all of us have been affected one way or another by this, the pandemic and the racial unrest. We have to figure out how to put one step in front of one foot in front of the other and go on. So thank you so much for inviting me to share some thoughts on this webinar. And I'd like to thank especially New City Press and Living Press magazine for organizing it, just helping us to reflect, to look back and look now and look in the future, trying to find the answers is very important. So this pandemic and racial unrest have made us all reevaluate and reposition ourselves in all we do, really, day in, day out. We were busy before, we are still busy, and how do we do it so that we now start paying attention to the human who is around us, as Professor Hosman said. We've now, even if we didn't know, now we know we cannot not pay attention to racial issues in our country, in our spaces, especially in learning and teaching. So how do we respond as humans? It's no secret that really in academia, we have this big ego, and I mean, in essence, it may be bad, but really, we called to compete for awards, compete for grants. We're called to do that, right? And so it's almost inherent that we focus on these processes that help us to get promotion and get ahead and so on. But these are not useful in instructional settings, right? So we have to keep looking at what our core mission is when we are called to teach, when we are called to interact with the students as faculty members and as students, when you're called to accommodate other people you're learning with. And so the question is now, how do we do away with ego and be humble so that we can learn from everyone involved and as faculty members from our students? How do we humble ourselves? How do we put on the side our ego that has, tells to show what we know, or to present the best methodology and the best content, but how do we put that on the side a little bit and focus on the individual that we're working with? So armed with this question, I decided to explore empathy as the special tool that I feel will be handy as we jump into the unknown. So I came across this as I was researching and thinking, meditating, I came across this quote when President Obama visited Pope Francis. Reflecting on it, he said, I think the theme that stitched our conversation together was a belief that in politics and in life, the quality of empathy, the ability to stand in somebody else's shoes and to care for someone, even if they don't look like you or talk like you or share your philosophy, that's critical. That's critical, to be able to empathize. Well, I'm not sure if empathy is enough, especially in higher education. You know, saying, oh, I empathize with you, is that enough to make things happen? So I was reminded of Kia Lubig's work on spirituality of communion, which is absolutely a guiding message all around. So I'd like to focus on modeling actionable empathy for healing and learning sake. Let's just focus on actionable empathy. And so, so this modeling really promotes a student-centered approach that actually Kiara Rubik refers to as the other-centered method that brings about effective teaching and learning. So as we jump into the unknown, I'd like us to think about how the fact that having empathy and feeling empathetic is not enough. We have to think about what the other is experiencing. So we have to be humble enough to look at what the other person is experiencing. Being intentional listeners will get us there. We will consider that person as human, like us, as always Kiara emphasizes on being the other, leaving yourself on the side and be the other. How do they feel? So what can I do to help? So the actionable empathy is the kind of empathy that would move us to do something, to fix something for the other person, or to at least be prepared to shout out our support if we need to, if that's what's needed. So we have to be ready to learn and to take action. So in a nutshell, actionable empathy to build a learning community. Actionable empathy to build trust. Actionable empathy to heal together. Once we've formed the learning community, we can heal together because we trust each other. And actionable empathy to enhance an environment conducive to learning. All together, that can get us somewhere as we try to figure out this unknown how. And I wouldn't finish without talking about culturally responsive pedagogy for the teaching part and culturally responsive learning. Now we need time we get informed. It's time we look at what's needed so we can learn more about culture, the culture of those who are in our classrooms, in our classes, the culture of those, the colleagues. It's truly amazing when we start listening to who we're working with, what we learn, and how we change, adjust our curriculum, adjust our syllabi, so that the text we choose to use in a classroom, in the class, responds to the students who are in our classes, the different cultures that are represented in our classes. And then as a student, asking the right questions about culture. What text are you using? What methodology is being used? Are these responding to the cultures that are represented in that class, around you, and of course in the world at large? Thank you.
Thank you, Professor NTIHIRAGEZA. An eloquent reminder for us, this idea of actionable empathy, as well as in our own pedagogy, a greater sense of global and cultural engagement. Professor Lewis, you're sitting in the heart of New York. What is your view of the unknown as you prepare to enter the classroom? I believe in less than an hour, you'll be entering your first class, if I got that right.
Well, thank you very much, Professor James. No, I already have. I am just emerging from having been in my classroom, and I want to again share Professor NTIHIRAGEZA's and Professor Espino's gratitude for this space in this moment. The unknown, from my perspective as my discipline of law, sort of builds on, I think, what both of the other panelists have mentioned already. And I would say that the big unknown is this pressing question left off at the end of the civil rights movement that in many ways this moment continues, and it's where do we go from here? Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote an essay on that, and I think for many students there is a sense of the need for compassion to recognize the loss that we have suffered, the need for empathy to understand where people are in pain. These are real, and I think the next reaction coming out of the trauma, both of having an image of our nation punctured. As you mentioned, Professor James, I'm sitting in New York, and as much as we all remember the death of 3,000 people completely shifted the universe and was a paradigm shifting moment, we now have about 60 times that in terms of that in the wealthiest country on earth. Likewise, with I specifically invoke Dr. King, there is almost a double sense of deja vu. Where do we go from here? These are all things that we were supposed to have conquered, that we are now supposed to be in the new era of sort of the age of character over color, and not once again having things be so determined color, in much the same way that there is, Professor Espino could talk about all the theology about the years of the Lord, and yet the sense that the years of salvation nonetheless bear the same pain that they did prior to Calvary. So in the where do we go from here question, the actual concrete practical next steps, lawyers especially, how do we turn this pain into legislation or reform? My sense that the most important piece of this, where we are right now, is the discipline of abiding. Actually, I think this is, it's calling for a counter lawyer tendency, which is to try to go out and fix things in the discipline of law and find solutions. And really it's about abiding, because that is the space where genuine action, meaningful change will come out of. One of the gifts, the graces of this moment is the notion that you can accompany, we'll switch abiding to almost accompaniment. You can accompany people in their reality right now, and that will give its contours. And I think one of the special graces is in this moment where we're feeling the double whammy, the reality of systemic racism, abiding in that, walking with someone, just accompanying them as they articulate their pain and their fear, also reveals in many ways the fact of the pandemic universe, at least in terms of vulnerability or susceptibility to disease, in terms of fear, in terms of economic uncertainty, that there are many of our neighbors who have been living in that reality for a very long time. And now this pandemic has given us a gateway into quarantine, poverty, uncertainty, all of which were realities that many of our neighbors were living with. So I think as much as, again, here in New York, where there is about a 20% unemployment rate on account, there is a massive sense where 1975 or its fiscal crisis and all of its ills are about to be revisited, or we're in the midst of that. There's a real sense for immediate practical action, I would say the most important thing that this semester can allow is accompaniment, in terms of the correct response to the unknown called, well, where do we go from here? I would sort of say that we have an invitation, that the solutions, the path to where we're going to go will emerge, the true path, the path that we should be following will emerge out of accompaniment.
Thank you, Professor Lewis. I am taking away from each of these opening remarks the notions of, again, compassion, care, and companionship, and this actionable empathy that's being called for. And Professor Lewis underscores that with this call to be in communion with others by abiding in their world, in their suffering. But I'd like to give, we're almost 40 minutes into this webinar, and we have some questions from those of you that are patiently listening in. So we want your voice to be part of this. So I'm going to pick a question here that I think is a nice lead into some comments from our panelists. Professor Amy Ullman from Georgetown University asks a question as she gets ready to enter the classroom. So all of these great ideas about being in unity and communion with our students over Zoom. How do we do that? What's the practicality of doing it? So Amy asks, do you have any suggestions for students who feel shy about breaking the ice with people they have not yet physically met in order to enter into that more vulnerable space that we all want as faculty for that dynamic and substantive sharing? What say you, Professor Ospino? How do you see yourself as you're preparing and navigating this walk into virtual or real into the classroom?
Thank you, Amy, for that question. And I mean, definitely going from in-person teaching into the virtual world, which in many ways, somehow borders the personal and impersonal. We still see each other. We still listen to one another. Yet, it's not the same. It's not the same as, when one loves someone, it's not the same as having the picture of that someone as to have the person and being next to her or him. I think, from a pedagogical perspective, because your question is more practical, I think that what's been happening right now has challenged the predominant model of doing higher education and teaching higher education, which is the lecture way, or the idea that everything needs to be done in large groups and orally. But what about if we can we begin to explore with smaller groups? I'm thinking it's more difficult, definitely, to, have a group of 20, 30, 50, 80 students on Zoom boxes, trying to share their personal stories. But it's not as difficult, and I have experienced this with my own students. When I break them up into groups of 3 or 4 into the groups, and they are more comfortable. Sometimes I join, sometimes I cannot join, sometimes I just listen to what they are saying. But the small group dynamic, for now works. The other aspect from a pedagogical perspective that I have been exploring with my own students is, let's move away from the, assuming that the only way to express oneself is just in writing papers or orally. But what about if we invite our students to express themselves through art, through music, through poetry, or through painting? I had a student last semester, as a matter of fact, who did one woman theatrical show for 10 minutes in which she expressed what most likely a 50-page paper would have never been able to explain. And there are people who may be, who might be shy to express themselves, in a debate or maybe sharing in a large group, but they are not shy, in terms of writing a poem or writing a song or writing doing a small theatrical presentation. So those are some of the small practical tips that I would suggest.
Those are terrific examples, Professor Spina. I love that idea of a student in your theology graduate class performing a one-woman show to express the themes of that course. I know another creative person on our panel, Professor NTIHIRAGEZA, has some ideas. How are you navigating and preparing for this classroom, this new, maybe old classroom experience, but new in the way that that we want to engage students?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Amy, for that great question. If you had asked me in the spring when we just jumped out and to work asynchronously, I would have said, "Oh my, I have no idea." But this idea again, actionable empathy, we set out as a team, our faculty members, and started sharing ideas together. It's like, how can we help our students? How can we support them? So we have a list of resources and one of the suggestions then was for students to turn in assignments. If the class is not about writing, let students turn in videos, for example. Rather than writing papers, let them videotape themselves, just like Professor Ospino gave the example of the theater student. Well, give them options. This makes me think about Amy, think about universal design, being flexible to respond to different students. But the one that came that showed me that it can be done was in the summer. We've been running at Northeastern University, we've been running African Summer Institute for 18 years. And what we do in that institute, we have coffee, we have cookies, and people bring in the ethnic foods and so on. This time I said, no, we can't do it. It's all done. It's meant to be physical. It's got to be on site. But then my colleagues said, let's try virtual and see what happens. Let me tell you, it was such a great success. So what we did, we applied the Ubuntu methodology, the focus of the humanhood, checking on everybody else before you look at yourself and so on. So what we did, 30 minutes before the class started, we all got together. The students didn't have to come in. They just, whoever was ready would bring our coffee, our breakfast, and we just talk. And so there was one student I remember who was incredibly shy. So we decided he would just be there. You could see he was like somewhere in his room. And by the way, there was a student who was on his bed. That was the comfortable space that I'm not sure if I would continue that encouraging that, but that's what he wanted. He wanted to feel safe. But we found out he was losing so much around. I mean, there was so much going on, personal issues, but we let him be. But by the end of the session, he produced beautiful work. And the whole group was like clapping, excited for him to be engaging the way he was engaging at the end. But somehow we had to let him be and just checking on him, seeing how he's doing. And that's really heavy. But the 30 minutes every day that we met was absolutely magical. Students connected, asked all kinds of questions, personal, professional, you name it. And then after the 30 minutes, we would start the content. And so the interaction, so by the end, they had this strong community built. It was beautiful. When one woman couldn't turn on her camera, something went wrong, they all stopped. They say, okay, you can do this, you can do that. I mean, we were like, can we use 5 minutes to help her? And we waited for her to connect. So anyway, that's just a couple of examples I had in this past few months. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I love that idea of Ubuntu pedagogy that you apparently facilitated so well. I have a question for Professor Lewis. Your trade in pedagogy as a law professor is the Socratic method. Mm. How are you going to translate that in a virtual environment?
Well, I have, I'll sort of describe the very, very, very fresh experience and sort of the composite elements. I think, so I would say two pieces of it. Overall, I have approached this semester, which I think it's very necessary. And to your point, Professor James, it's a Socratic method, and it's also sort of what I would call the shtick or the tradition of law school, right? There's a very real sense where law school is a space that tries to socialize people in the profession, and part of that socialization has certain exercises. I have felt that as sort of a need to break the ice, a need to, as accompaniment, is to immediately start off the class by acknowledging we're not in this to get, rather, this is not a normal class, right? This is not a normal situation. There's a lot of pain. We have to be open about that. It is not normal. It is not ideal to meet on the internet. It might be a respite for many people, but it's not ideal or normal. That was part number one. Part number two, to sort of facilitate a method that is thought of law school as trying to get individuals to distill or extract the law out of judicial opinions, or to extract an understanding of the law. The one thing that I have adapted, I think it's almost exactly what Professor NTIHIRAGEZA was describing, is I have told students this semester, we are all in this together, and one of their assignments on which they are graded is to produce videos that are what otherwise would be summaries of whatever reading they have to do. And they each have been assigned a reading. I have openly told them, this is probably being recorded, but I've sort of suggested, notwithstanding the rules from the American Bar Association, I have no expectation that you're going to read the cases. I don't want you to. The whole point of this is, you have stressors. Rely on the summary of your classmates, and then the Socratic method is based on, did you watch the video? The 5-minute distillation of the case, and now we'll talk based on that. Because I've truly wanted to I think, have a pedagogy that reflects the ethos of this moment, which is cooperation. We're relying on each other here in the city. Everyone's got, we need each other. We always have, but I think it's become part of, the daily life. So that's been adopted, and other law school exercises are now based upon your participating in communion with others. You're watching the videos, you're being in the small, if you didn't watch the video, we have small breakout groups where folks can talk, who watch the video will talk about what the video said. And that way, that will foster a sense of communion adapted to the realities of the present, as opposed to sort of the harsh Socratic version of, I need to test whether you did this reading, which seems to me in this environment, a particularly ridiculous and unjust ask.
Terrific responses of in-class creativity as we make things up, but as we thoughtfully construct classroom environments and learning environments that adapt to the creative responses by our students, right? I mean, never underestimate, is my rule, never underestimate the capacity for students to respond to our needs in terms of the learning environment where we learn from them. So I'm gonna throw the question to Chris, our student on the panel. What inspires you to engage this new classroom environment with the natural vulnerabilities of new technologies? Now, you've had some experience this summer and spring. What do you anticipate in the fall, and how are you approaching this as a student?
Yeah, thank you for that question. A lot of the things that you guys were saying, the professors on this panel, that involve a lot of creativity, right? A lot of thought into it to make it, the classroom, virtually, engaging. And kind of something that was interesting that I, while doing these interviews is the people that are in STEM classes, that like science, tech, all these things that have like a lot of hands-on lab work. They were kind of at a loss. They're like, how, am I going to be able to understand what else is, what is happening all around the world, and in our country, in our backyards, and try to apply that to what I'm learning right now, right? And interestingly, one of the girls I had interviewed, she said that it does apply. Everything that we're going through right now does apply to what we do in the classroom, and that comes a long way with just the transparency between the professors and our students. Definitely being in online classrooms and going into breakout rooms, especially with people you don't know, it's scary. Like, it's kind of awkward, especially if you don't have your camera on, or like everybody's just kind of more of a, a shy type of person, and it's tough. But going back to what Professor Ospino said in the very beginning, is starting every class with a "How are you?" That, to me, at least in my perspective, helps me kind of say, okay, this guy isn't just here to, teach us some words on paper and run away with his money. He's actually here invested in us as his students, because what he has studied and worked hard for all his life, and his profession is to teach others. We're here to be able to receive it, and we're receiving it with a lot of there's going to be a lot of genuinity in it. And definitely at the beginning of spring, it was tough. A lot of people who didn't know how to use Zoom, or they didn't know how to adapt to their course content. And especially when I was in finals week, the protests of George Floyd were going on every single day, and it was just tough to even focus, right? So they even did optional finals, stuff like that, because we realized that the professors themselves, it's affecting them too in its own ways, whether it's personally or within their profession and the environment they're in. Whatever we're going through, professors and their families are probably going through the same thing, especially even the younger ones that are either like adjunct or going to school, trying to make ends meet. And when they voiced that, when the professors told us that, we realized, okay, we're not alone. It's not just the students' plight, it's everyone's going through this. And what I'm hoping, during going into the fall, is that it can continue the transparency, because even today, things are going crazy. Things are insane. I just got an alert earlier that the NBA playoffs, the teams were boycotting their playoff games because of the shooting of Jacob Blake back in Wisconsin. And like that, those things, I don't think, oh, how does that have to do with anything? But it does. It's like, why are we just, being empathetic but not being not doing anything? We need to be active. And why don't we use this education that we're paying for a lot to start developing that, and to start proving that and testing it out with the support from our professors and the administration. And yeah, that's what I'm looking forward to. And creativity and flexibility, it's always going to be a work in progress, but now we've had a few classes under our belts. We could definitely challenge ourselves to be better and to foster this sense of unity and community among everybody, especially those who are on the quiet side, or those who are vocal, just to make sure everyone is welcomed and appreciative in these moments.
Thank you, Chris. I think it's a reflection of your character, that your advice to faculty implies that you have great empathy for us as well and care, but also, an important challenge to say, look, we're coming back to campus. We're not the same we were 6 months ago. We're not the same we were 3 months ago. And we're not docile in being expressive about and caring for what's going on in the world, a world that we need to live in. And we need to be part of that change. So I think that's a beautiful expression of both your own care, compassion, abiding with us, and also the challenge that we're in this together, and it's not easy, and it shouldn't be easy. So we have a few more minutes left. I'd like to offer the panelists one more opportunity to suggest one of your top ideas or suggestions for us as we move into the classroom. For those of us who are joining the webinar, who will be going into the classroom as teachers, as students, as administrators, what would be your advice as we approach this new semester? Professor Ospino, we'll begin with you.
Well, I will be tempted to repeat myself, but I'm not going to repeat the points that I said. I just actually want to build up on what JEANINE was saying earlier, and that the importance of this empathetic action. I think that as we move forward, you know, in our classes and in this semester, we need to be as attentive to what is happening in the classroom as with what is happening outside the classroom. So my invitation is, be sure to connect, the outside life, to the life of the classroom, and let's invite our students and our colleagues and everybody else to get involved, to act, to do something, whether it's community organizing, politically organizing, voting, challenging, denouncing, speaking up, researching, but we need to do something.
Professor NTIHIRAGEZA, what is your challenge to us or suggestion as we move into the semester?
Thank you. Many times when we see someone going through social issues, we say, "Oh, I am so sorry. Let me know how I can help you. How I can help. Let me know how I can help." And then many times I've never seen anybody who comes back and say, "Hey, you promised that you will help me." So let's be, again, going back to the action about empathy. Let's make sure we mean we're going to help. So let's have a bucket of tools, of resources, of places to go find a computer if the computer is broken. Companies that offer free or cheaper internet service. Let's have those resources. Maybe the university already has them. Let's have them next to us so we can just say, "Hey, I know you can go to this place and you get help." So really meaning help. Being intentional in listening and being intentional in really wanting to help is very, very important. And to me, as again, Professor Ospino, you said, "How are you?" Ask that question. Many times we expect to just say good, right? But if we are intentionally listening, we wouldn't expect good. We say, "How are you doing today? How are things?" Pointed to an issue that's happening, an event that's happening. Like you said, connect the word in the class to the word outside. That would be amazing. And lastly, I know that from my experience being department chair, students again and again in the faculty evaluations appreciate when a faculty member listens. When they intentionally listen, students repeat that, they notice and they appreciate it. And I think Chris also mentioned that on the video and today. So I truly believe we need to be there for our students. And for the students then, there's a proverb in Kirundi, in my native language, spoken in Burundi in Africa, that you cannot heal if you don't talk about how and where it hurts. So you have to say, "Hey, I'm hurting," for you to get, for someone to say, "Hey, go to the doctor," or "Here, try this, put ice on," or, to get ideas, you have to say you're hurting. So the proverb is, "Uja gukira indwara arayirata." So you have to say, if you're going to heal from an illness, a disease, you have to say it. Trust, your faculty members, talk to them. I've had the students through the years who would say, especially actually this summer, who we had lost her. I mean, we didn't know where she was. She didn't finish the semester, and in the summer didn't register. And we just kept asking, and all of us communicating until we included international programs. Well, guess what? The student, when we finally connected with her, she said, "I didn't think you would care." And that broke my, I said, "Oh my." So we need to tell our students that we care, and students do check and with your professors. If one maybe doesn't care much, you may find another one who cares. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor NTIHIRAGEZA. Professor Lewis, what advice do you have for us as a community of learners, teachers, and scholars as we move into the semester?
Very briefly, and again, building on the other ideas, to be open and transparent about this is not a normal semester or a normal time. I think that that is the exactly, Professor Narget's point of how you're doing means I should not expect to say, the old joke about in American culture, we say, how you doing? Somebody gives you an answer, you sort of block it out because it's really just a way of saying hi. This was the time to say, how are you doing? And I think from that answer, full on accompaniment, in terms of the normal semester, to not get one way or another, I'll try to broaden this out, right? There is a class in November I'm dreading to see what happens after that class and, how people are going to engage in that. That's not a class that we would go in and expect business as normal, depending on where people are. So I think that openness, and I would say, from my experience in law school, that full-on openness about this semester is not normal. We're not doing business as usual. We are adapting. Like, if we're doing this, it is so that we have the ability for you to continue with your education and you to be enriched. But it's not here, exactly as Chris was saying, just take your money and run off. We're continuing education, and we're going to figure out a way to do it in this environment where it's difficult, but we're going to be very open and transparent about that. Is the biggest piece of advice, the open vulnerability. And I think, exactly what Professor Nargesa was also describing, this idea where even if you don't know how to use the technology, admit it. Students will be like, do this, do that. They'll sort of, it's that, this is the semester for that, more than anything. Yes.
Well, I hear one message loud and clear throughout our webinar, and that is to a greater degree, embrace our own humanity, embrace each other's humanity, which has all of its flaws and suffering, which has all of the vulnerabilities, with all the joys, with all the opportunities, with all the creativity that is part of who we are as human beings, and to see that in ourselves as well as others. This is terrific advice. This was a wonderful conversation. This has inspired me to walk into my classroom starting next Tuesday. I want to thank all of our panelists. I want to thank Chris for the top of the program, wonderfully produced voices of students from across the country, and for your insights and inspiration for us this afternoon, this evening. I want to thank Hospin Ospino, good friend, terrific teacher, wonderful scholar, for spending the time with us in the midst of a busy schedule that I know you have. I want to thank Professor JEANINE NTIHIRAGEZA for your beautiful insights and your wonderful inspiration in terms of the way you live your life and how you teach and how you inspire others. And Professor Gregory Lewis in New York City for your terrific work, the concrete commitments that you have, your life of abiding with others, and now you bring that to the classroom. It's inspiring. I want to thank New City Press, and I want to thank Living City Magazine for producing our webinar as part of the series. There are more for you, those of you that are joining us, who I want to thank for spending the hour with us to look for other Dare to Care webinars on a variety of topics. I also want to thank the Fordham Institute on Religion, Law, and Lawyers Work, and the Institute for Administrators in Catholic Higher Ed at Boston College for co-sponsorship. And the post-webinar expectations are that you'll continue your conversations, for those of you that are teachers and learners, that you bring some of these ideas into your classroom and into your campuses and into your learning communities. And you will hear from us a follow-up email with resources that are related to the topics that we've discussed this evening, if you want to dive further into thinking about and meditating on these important topics. So I want to thank everyone. I want to thank the folks that are doing all the technology for us this afternoon as well. And all the best to us as we continue to walk in the unknown, but we're in the unknown together. And we will come to know one another better, we hope, through walking in this unknown. Thank you and have a good evening.
You too. Thank you so much, Mike. Thank you.